Hi, it's Mr. Kelly again, and this is a little conversation about Spain and the Americas. We're pulling it from one of the objectives from Transatlantic Encounters and Colonial Beginnings. And what we're going to do is tie one specific objective, Spain's colonization, conquest in the Americas, and contrast it with the English colonies that are going to occur later and use it as a way to um, present a cause for the American Revolution. We'll get to the specifics of that a little bit later. First, some backstory on Spain in the Americas. So the Spanish colonial periods can be broken into three really big periods. First, there's exploration and discovery, and that's from 1492 to about 1520. Conquest from the 1520s until the 1570s, and then colonization, which lasts from about the 1570s until actually the early 1800s. So the end of Spanish colonial rule or the colonial period um, kind of intercedes with American expansion in the early 1800s. So though that's an interesting part of U.S. history that we'll explore later. But for now, we're going to take a look at the very early periods of Spanish exploration. So exploration and discovery, 1492 to 1520. Um, just about every student knows about Columbus's arrival in the Caribbean in 1492. That really begins the period of exploration and discovery for the Spanish in the Americas. It continues with Vasco de Balboa at the Isthmus of Panama in 1513. So he makes the journey from the eastern part of the isthmus to the western and actually sees the Pacific Ocean for the first time. And then later, Ferdinand Magellan, about 6 years later, circumnavigates the entire Earth by ship between 1519 and 1522. So, though the Portuguese had done a lot of exploration earlier on of areas outside of Europe, it was really the Spanish that brought it to scale during this period of time between 1492 and the 1520s. If you count Magellan, that really ends 1522. After this period of time, you've got the period of conquest. So this lasts from roughly the 1520s to about the 1570s, and this is where you frequently hear in history, and it's pretty well known, the conquistadores, which was a general name for all of the Spanish military officers who were sent to the Americas to extract as much wealth as possible from the Americas and to wreck any kind of resistance to Spanish rule. So Hernan Cortez and his expedition, which came to the Americas, ended up conquering large portions of the Americas, not with firearms, not with steel weapons, but actually with the disease smallpox, which Europeans had built an immunity up to. Um, but gave to the Native Americans in what's now modern day Mexico. Though we don't have a lot of primary documentation on the numbers of Native Americans who died from these diseases, we know that those numbers are pretty close to the hundreds of thousands. So Cortez and a total of 600 of his men end up conquering militarily the surviving Aztecs. Similarly, Francisco Pizarro conquered the Incan Empire. In Peru and modern day Peru and opened up the exploration of that region of South America and again its conquest of what's now modern day South and Southwest Florida as well. Colonial period lasts from the 1570s until the early 1800s. This really sees a period that is far less brutal to Native Americans. It's not as based on extracting resources like gold and silver, for the Spanish crown. It's more the development of agriculture, particularly the farming of corn and cotton, livestock ranching over a long period of time, and religious indoctrination of the surviving Native Americans, the ones who hadn't been killed by smallpox and other diseases that were brought by the Europeans. The Spanish monarchy, once it was completely united around the time of Columbus, was interested in increasing its gold and silver coffers because this is really seen as the ultimate source of wealth. And it was also interested in converting as many native people as possible to Catholicism. So you can see those two desires expressed in the entire Spanish colonial period that lasts the better part of 300 years. So similarities to, of the Spanish colonial, movement, conquest and colonial movement to the Northern English colonies of the early 17th and into the 18th centuries. So in both cases, you've got very strong monarchies that are very united. They've consolidated their power at home, which are, as in turn, able to provide funds and resources for exploration. So in both cases, you've got English monarchies and French monarchies that are able to consolidate their power at home for the most part and are able to send out expeditions either for the purpose of exploration or for profit, which was very important to the Jamestown colony, the English Jamestown colony, and then later the northern colonies as well. So there's definitely strong similarities between the two. There, it's just a matter of these colonial efforts happening at different times. Whoops, sorry about that. So again, to review the big similarities, very strong monarchies in these countries, which are able to provide resources and a desire for profit to be able to bring wealth to the monarchies at home. All right, differences from the Northern English colonies. So, of the Spanish Empire. My goodness, this is really um, kind of difficult right now. Sorry about that. So English colonies were allowed by their monarchies to be more independent from the start. So instead of, in the Spanish case, the expeditions being mostly military and being very top down and very strict in the way resources would be extracted, the English colonies were really given much more of a free hand to be independent in creating their own religious institutions and their own political institutions and their own sense of control of the colony, as long as they paid a certain amount to their respective crowns, and as long as they were able to create, you know, viable businesses. A lot of colonists actually arrived in the northern colonies to remake their own religion, not spread it to other people like Native Americans. So a really good example of this is the Puritans who arrive in the Massachusetts Bay Colony um, in the early 17th century, the 1620s. And one of the reasons why they've arrived there is they feel that their religion back in Europe is impure. It's been corrupted, and so they are seeking to purify their version of Christianity by remaking it in a new land, in an alien frontier land, and to make it very, very specific to them. This is very, very different from the Spanish role of religion for colonization, which was one of converting as many Native Americans as possible, and that Catholicism is, in the way it's being interpreted in Europe, is the only way to interpret it, no matter where you go in the world. So that's a real difference between the two. Another one, and this really goes to one of the reasons why the English colonies eventually will rebel and declare their independence, is that from the very start, the English, French, and Dutch colonies, but of course our focus is on the English, set up family life and permanent settlements pretty much immediately. So the Spanish sent men, they sent soldiers, some of whom were married, many of whom were not. They were young, unattached, very motivated by gold and glory. Um, the colonists who came later to the northern colonies frequently brought their wives, they brought their children, and immediately set up their family lives um, from the very start. So this led, in addition to more independence, as I had mentioned before, their own institutions, you had a much greater and faster increase of population concentrated in the northern colonies that end up becoming a challenge to the Native Americans and a way for these new colonies to create their own culture and lifestyle and their whole sense of independence. Okay, so the freedom that they had to be able to create their own institutions is going to lead to a sense of independence and self-reliance that will lead directly to um, the Declaration of Independence and the American Revolution. So again, just to sum up, how does this relate to the unit essential question? What were the causes of the American Revolution? The North American colonies had to survive and eventually thrive almost from their start in the 1600s. These colonies established a culture that was independent and very self-reliant compared to the Spanish. And then local institutions they created, like the Quaker, Episcopal, and Puritan churches, which were all offshoots of the original Catholic religion, which dominated Europe until the Protestant Reformation. Um, all of these institutions in the northern colonies supported family life, independent political institutions like town halls and elected selectmen, within a given community, and a very independent social order, which was very, very different from the top-down colonial governments that were created by the Spanish. So hopefully this brings a little bit more clarity to you about this particular objective in the um, colonial encounters, or rather the transatlantic encounters and colonial beginnings part of the playlist.